This is an NJN News Special Report. Governor Whitman's State of the State Address.
Good evening, I'm Kent Manahan. Earlier today, Governor Whitman gave her second State of the State address before a joint session of the legislature. NJN now presents the governor's speech and the Democratic response to the address.
Thank you very much, everyone. Before I begin my formal address this afternoon, I'd like to take a moment to say a few thank yous. Earlier this week, if you'll forgive the pun, we weathered quite a storm. And I want to commend the efforts of our state and local road crews, our Department of Transportation, the National Guard, the New Jersey State Police, and other emergency management personnel who were extraordinary in their dedication. It truly was something to see. And I know I speak for everyone in New Jersey when I say just how grateful we are for their efforts. We can say with a great deal of pride that our state is in good hands with people like them on the job. I also want to thank all the people of our state for their patience and their cooperation during this emergency. That cooperation made it easier to clean our streets and highways and get New Jersey back on the road again. It has also put us in good shape to face the next winter storm, which, if the weather forecasters are correct, is just around the corner. I know everyone will continue to pull together no matter what comes our way. Finally, I want to express a word of appreciation to the news media. Your efforts to keep New Jerseyans fully informed about the situation were extremely important, and I want you to know how much I value your contribution as well. Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chief Justice, distinguished members of the legislature, the bench, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. I want to begin this State of the State address by first congratulating the returning legislators and welcoming the new members. You are serving in a demanding and a rewarding arena. The challenges will be many and the thanks few, but never doubt that your work is important. What you do here will help prepare our state for the next century. Let me also congratulate the new Speaker of the General Assembly from Salem County, Jack Collins. Jack, I know that you will do as fine a job as Speaker as you have done representing the 3rd District for this past decade. I look forward to working with you and with the Senate President, Don DeFrancesco, in the session ahead. As I look around this chamber, I realize that we have come a long way together. When I first ran for governor, mothers and fathers, friends and neighbors were reeling under the heavy burden of high taxes. I'm happy to say that together we have reversed that trend. As of 10 days ago, income tax rates for most New Jerseyans are now a full 30% lower than they were just 2 years ago. But more importantly, our tax cuts are working. Since I took office in January of 1994, New Jersey has seen a net increase of 117,000 jobs. And while we can't stop corporate downsizing, we can continue to create a climate that ensures that lost jobs are replaced with others. We must add to the opportunities for work. That's important, but we need to continue to move forward. So today, I am going to take the traditional State of the State speech in a new direction. Usually, I would reflect on the past year's achievements and the challenges that lie ahead. But this year, you can read all about them in this book, and it will also be on the internet. And I urge you to avail yourselves of that opportunity. But today, I want to discuss with you only one issue. the one issue that will determine more than any other what kind of a place New Jersey will be in the 21st century. I'm speaking, of course, about the education of New Jersey's children. No issue we confront this year will be more challenging or more important than our efforts to provide every New Jersey child with a world-class education. No one in this room can argue that our system does not need some help. No one can claim that we are giving young people every opportunity to lead a productive and fulfilling life. And no one can say that we are meeting all our obligations to our children. We all know we have some excellent schools in New Jersey. Unfortunately, far too many of our children don't have access to them. They venture forth from high school unable to read and comprehend a job application. Some barely have the math skills to make change for a dollar. Others communicate so poorly they can't make themselves understood. It's not long before these young adults see a future of bleak despair. A job, if they ever get one, will be at the lowest end of the economic scale and will never move them closer to the dream of owning a home or supporting a family. They think they've been cheated of their future, and they have been. I have seen schools that are sending students like these out their doors. At some of them, it's obvious why students aren't learning. At others, the reasons are not as apparent. The results are discouraging in both cases. But this grim picture can be changed. There are examples of educational excellence and innovation here in New Jersey that can help guide us to where we ought to be going. Come with me for a moment to a school where every classroom has a full complement of computers so that students, starting in kindergarten, use them with confidence as an integrated part of their learning. A school where parents can call every night to find out by voicemail what their children's homework assignments are for that evening. A school whose faculty is engaged and excited about increasing their own knowledge, as the students are about pursuing their education. We have schools like this in New Jersey. I visited them, and it doesn't cost a fortune to run them. In fact, some of these schools are within an hour's drive of this chamber, and they are spending less than the state per pupil average. But these schools are the exception. We must make them the rule. The reasons why are simple. We live in a world increasingly driven by technology. The ability to understand and manage information is becoming critically important. This much is clear. Our children will not be able to succeed in the economy of the next century if their education doesn't even meet the standards of this century. Having visited a number of new and expanding businesses, I have seen the dominant role that technology is playing, from making air conditioners to making mortgages. Earning ability is closely linked to education. The average high school graduate earns more than twice as much a month as the average high school dropout. Over the course of their careers, the high school graduate will earn in excess of $200,000 more than those who have not graduated. And a diploma helps give them confidence to continue to achieve in life. Obviously, the lack of education closes doors, while education itself is the gateway to a successful career. Education also builds a productive and successful state. Each child we challenge and empower in the classroom is a child that we keep away from the temptations and seductions of the street. But that should be only a minimum goal. Every piece of evidence, empirical, anecdotal, and historical, convinces me that the future prosperity of our state depends on the richness of the education we provide to our students. The quality of life in this state tomorrow will be directly determined by the quality of education we provide to our children today. Now, we're all familiar with our state's history of attempting to provide a thorough and efficient education. For the past 20 years, funding for our system has been under challenge. We have been ordered to equalize spending between our 30 special needs districts and our wealthiest districts. Through a lack of any better measurement, we have reduced the goal of education to equity in spending parity alone. New Jersey has been going round in circles on this issue for 2 decades. People of goodwill have argued all sides, but to no avail. Governors and legislators have come and gone, yet this problem remains. 3 branches of government have wrestled with the issue, and we still don't have a solution. Somewhere along the way, our children have been lost in the shuffle. Clearly, we take education seriously in this state. Just look at how much we spend on it. Over the past 15 years, total school spending in New Jersey has jumped from $3 billion a year to almost $11 billion a year, a nearly 400% increase. That's almost 3 times the rate of inflation for that same period. Since 1970, the growth in New Jersey's education spending has outpaced every other state in the Union. Today, we spend more per pupil than anyone else. Yet our state colleges and universities spend $40 million a year just to teach entering students the skills they should have had before they received their high school diplomas. It has become increasingly clear that making a direct link between high spending and high achievement leads to a false conclusion. A great deal more goes into a successful education than an expansive spending program. Let me point out that the district with the highest average SAT scores in the state, Homedale in Monmouth County, spends below the state average. Of the 25 highest spending districts in the state, only 5 are among the highest achieving. And despite the fact that we have enabled our special needs districts to spend more than the state average and 80% above the national average, the combined SAT scores in those districts last year was a dismal 718. That's not just proof that we are failing the children in these districts. It also proves that money alone does not equal learning. On the other side of the equation, we can point to districts that produce solid academic results while spending below the state average. These districts, which include Fort Lee, South Brunswick, and Pittman, are delivering a thorough and efficient education. Obviously, if there were a direct link between spending and learning, New Jersey students would consistently outperform students in classrooms around America, but they do not. That is why I am committed to changing the way New Jersey defines and measures educational achievement. That is why I am committed to improving the way we deliver a thorough and efficient education to our children. And that is why I am asking you today to fundamentally change a system that has not served anyone well. Not our students, not teachers, not parents, and not taxpayers. Let me tell you at the onset, change will not be easy. We must expect opposition from those who benefit from the status quo. There is one group, however, whose voices will not be raised. The one group this matters to the most. The one group that has the most to lose if we do not act. Our children. They are why we must head in a new direction. We must stop chasing dollars and start creating scholars. Educational equality will only come when we commit ourselves to educational quality for all our students. At the heart of our efforts are core curriculum standards. I called for them when I was running for governor, and I feel even more strongly now that they are essential to improving education. If we want our students to compete successfully with their peers at home and abroad, in Asia as well as Arizona, in Europe as well as Utah, we must define what we expect them to learn. And we will not settle for setting the bar low. We must expect of all students, including those who are doing relatively well, to aim higher and do better. By the end of the century, they must be able to take their place not just at the head of America's class, but at the head of the world's class. If we encourage our children to reach beyond what's comfortable, to take on the tough stuff, we will instill a discipline that comes from mastering difficult subjects. Martin Luther King once wrote, "The function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically." We are defining core subjects that will foster those abilities and provide our students with the full opportunity to succeed in the next millennium. Since the start of this administration, we have been working with groups of teachers, school board members, business leaders, professors, and taxpayers to define what children should know in 8 core subjects. Last week, these groups shared the standards they produced with the State Board of Education. After Commissioner Klagholz makes his formal recommendations next month, the board will hold public hearings before finalizing them. I urge everyone to keep actively involved in this process. To date, we've held a total of 70 public forums in every part of this state to discuss this important issue. Thousands of citizens have made their views known. Now all of us together must ensure that the standards represent the highest academic expectations we can possibly set. But once the standards are in place, we will give our schools the flexibility that they need to meet them. Our emphasis will be on progress, not on process. In the meantime, the Department of Education will revise our testing system to measure students' achievements in the new standards. No student should be permitted to graduate without meeting those standards. High school diplomas should be worth more than the paper they're printed on. For the first time, we will fundamentally redefine what we expect students to learn when they attend schools in New Jersey. Of course, we must also fund the delivery of this new curriculum in every one of our school districts. We have the responsibility to make certain that every school district has the resources necessary to do its job. Parents expect it, the Constitution requires it, and common sense demands it. Some have suggested that the state of education in New Jersey represents a serious problem for my administration and this legislature. I do not agree. What we have now is an opportunity to make fundamental change and lead our education system in a truly new direction. In reality, we are not talking solely or even mainly about money. We already spend nearly 1/3 of the state's budget to support New Jersey's public schools. That commitment is a given. We are talking about the future of our children. Toward this end, I want to state the principles I believe should guide our efforts. First, we must reject the notion that education will improve if every district spends the maximum amount possible. Instead, we should enact meaningful reforms. Reforms that will enable each school district to educate our children well and spend each dollar wisely. We have to address this question: what must each district spend to provide a system of education that is both thorough and efficient? Specifically, we must define the programs, services, materials, and staffing that are needed to enable students to achieve the high standards we will set for them. Only then can we figure out how much it will cost to provide those things. Second, we must not ignore or forget that the word efficient is an equal part of the constitutional requirement. As we equalize spending across school districts, we cannot continue to tolerate expenditures that support duplication, inefficiency, excess, and waste. That's not good management, it's not good government, and it doesn't make for good education. Third, we must help New Jersey's more than 600 school districts reduce costs and create and spend a greater portion of those dollars available for instruction. Over the past 2 years, we ranked 46th of the 50 states in the proportion of education dollars that reach the classroom. We can improve that number by rewarding efficiency and penalizing waste. And we can do it by providing incentives for regional coordination so that districts can increase their efficiency by joining with others to share transportation routes, business services, food services, and the like. Fourth, we must return to local voters the authority to accept or reject inefficient or excessive spending by their local districts. In the 2 years prior to this administration, the Department of Education restored 94% of school budget increases rejected by the voters as unjustified hikes to their property taxes. I am pleased to report that by 1995, we were able to cut that proportion to 27%. To the greatest extent possible, local property tax rates should be within the control of local voters. As we move forward, we must do so for all districts in our state, not just the poorest and not just the wealthiest. The more than 300 districts that are neither wealthy nor poor must not be squeezed from both ends. Fifth, for inspiration and example, we must look to the school districts that are already providing a thorough and efficient education. Districts like Pittsgrove in Salem County, a leader statewide in contracting out financial and support services and arranging cross-district purchasing. Or Pompton Lakes in Passaic County, which has streamlined its administrative structure to free up more dollars for the classroom. What makes these and other districts like them worthy models is the simple fact that they do not empty the wallets of the taxpayers to support overspending. Instead, they have learned how to manage public resources efficiently in support of clearly defined educational goals, and they are delivering quality education. Sixth, we must continue to meet our responsibility to the more than 100 districts and schools, both urban and non-urban, facing the toughest challenges, where poverty and social conditions frustrate learning for even the most motivated children. We should not only be sure these districts have the funding they need for their regular education programs, we should also give them added resources to help counter the negative effects of poverty on learning. But we must make absolutely certain that these funds are used to support educational programs, such as preschool and full-day kindergarten, that have been shown to make a positive difference in the lives and learning of children. There is no reason that children who live in poverty should receive an impoverished education. We have the resources. We just have to make sure they're put to the best use. I want to work with you, my colleagues in the legislature on both sides of the aisle, to develop school funding legislation that incorporates these principles. We must provide our children with high-quality education while respecting the hardworking taxpayer and their money. I want to assure parents, teachers, and school boards throughout this state that we have no intention of dropping this new plan in your laps and walking away. We intend to be your partners in progress. We will work to remove whatever regulatory barriers get in the way of local decision-making. We will act as a clearinghouse for the good practices that will emerge from local efforts. And we will help ensure that all educators are prepared to assume whatever new responsibilities these efforts will require. Our teachers are on the front line, and they deserve our support. Cohen, please. We will reward those schools that use dollars wisely to support children's education and penalize those that spend wastefully or consistently fail to educate students. And we will make certain the people of our state have the information they need to participate more fully in our schools. Ladies and gentlemen of the legislature, my administration has presented you with a plan that includes core curriculum standards, a solid structure through which to deliver that curriculum, a funding approach, and systems reform. And while I know that at the end of the day the details may differ, I trust the principles behind them will hold. Now we must test our own principles. How firm is our resolve? How real is our commitment? How determined are we to make a positive difference for New Jersey students? Do we have the will to make our children the only special interest? My friends, the way we answer these questions will determine the way we will be remembered. Meeting this challenge head-on will not be easy. Moving in a new direction rarely is. It will not always be pleasant. The rewards may be seen at times too few or too far removed, but we must act. I look forward to working with Senate President Don DeFrancesco, Speaker Collins, and minority leaders John Lynch and Joe Doria, all of whom have long demonstrated a commitment to improving education. United, nothing can stand in our way. In fact, we have already started our work together. The bipartisan charter school bill that reached my desk last week is exactly the sort of fundamental change that we need. I want to thank Senator Jack Ewing and Assemblyman John Rocco for shepherding this important bill through the legislature. So as I end this speech today, I will reinforce our commitment by signing the charter school bill. In the weeks and months ahead, I hope that this moment will stand as a reminder that together we can give our children the hope and the opportunity they deserve, and in the process, help prepare our state for the next century. And now I'd like to invite children who will stand to benefit the most from our efforts to stand with me as I sign this bill. Thank you all very much.
This is Michael Aaron. Governor Whitman is signing a charter schools bill. This gives people around the state the opportunity to create their own schools with the help of public funds. The governor is surrounded by children. We're told 5 of them are from the Krebs Middle School in East Windsor, Mercer County. 5 are from the Lawrence Township Public Schools, also here in Mercer County. And 4 are from the Trenton School District from the Munoz Rivera Middle School. The governor is receiving the congratulations of the legislative leaders. This was her second State of the State address, as we told you earlier. It's really her third big speech at this time of the year, but in her first year as governor, the speech was an inaugural speech. Last year was her first State of the State. The governor is making her way out of the chamber. Now, this speech was something of a departure for governors in State of the State speeches. Normally, a governor will set out an agenda for the year ahead, tackle a broad range of issues, set a tone for the year ahead. Governor Whitman, after talking about the snow this week and thanking the many citizens of the state who did yeoman work, including the news media, I might say, and congratulating Jack Collins on his selection as the Assembly Speaker, said she was going to depart from that tradition of a governor setting out a broad agenda. She spoke entirely about one subject today, education. Let me go back to you in the studio for a moment.
Thank you, Michael. We'll be back with the Democratic response to the governor's State of the State address in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back to NJN's coverage of Governor Whitman's State of the State address. The governor has completed her speech before a joint session of the state legislature and has left the Assembly chambers. The speech primarily focused on education issues. The State of the State address sets the agenda for the governor's next 2 years in office. NJN State House correspondent Jim Hooker is standing by with two lawmakers who will present the Democratic response to the governor's address. Jim?
Thanks, Kent. Joining me now here to present the Democratic response to that address are Senator Bernard Kenny of Hoboken, the Assistant Senate Minority Leader, and Assemblyman Neil Cohen of Roselle, the Assembly Deputy Minority Leader. Senator Kenny, let's start with you. What was your reaction to the governor's address?
Well, it's hard to disagree with any of the general statements the governor made. We all acknowledge the fact that dollars per se don't guarantee or ensure a good education, and we all agree that you have to make reforms along the way. But I thought the remarks were very lacking in detail. It's hard to be a critic of the speech because there wasn't any real substance to what the governor is offering in terms of what's going to constitute the core curriculum, how much that will cost, and how that's going to be distributed around the state. It appears that this has an attachment of sorts to what has occurred during the last 2 years, which was the reduction of the state income tax by 30%. It's a bit ironic that...
Let me stop you there. What's the attachment?
Well, the state income tax is dedicated to funding education under our Constitution. And we've reduced that revenue stream by $1.3 billion because of the governor's actions. And now the governor's speech is almost entirely dedicated to the very object for which that money was dedicated.
Talking about we've got to spend a little less on it. Spending isn't the answer for education. Efficient is. Well,
spending is not the answer, which we agree on, but the challenges of public education are not static. They're dynamic that'll take us into the next century. You have school facilities, you have poor children, you have the challenge of technology, electronic technology, which the governor wants to put into all our classrooms. The challenge of education, public education in the state is growing, it's not diminishing. So it's interesting that when you pose this against the income tax cuts, the governor has made this a priority, yet where are we going to fund it and who is going to get the funds?
There may be less there to do more. Let's go over to Neil Cohen. Neil, off camera before we started here, you talked about, you were watching the speech with us, you talked about an empty speech, and then you were talking about, it sounded to you like you're at a PTA meeting.
Exactly.
What are your thoughts on this speech?
This is the first speech, and I think if we go back in history, it's the first State of the State speech where a governor stayed on one issue only. And I think that was an attempt to misdirect from all the other problems that she's having and that the economy is having. So she stayed on one issue and focused on one issue through the entire speech. State of the State is supposed to be your blueprint. What you feel the vision should be for your state for at least the next 2 years and perhaps going into the next century. And I think her speech was thin.
Could it be that she was putting all her eggs in one basket or trying to marshal all her forces just to education? Or, as you said, you think that she's trying to stay away from some failures that she may have had in recent months?
Well, I think there's been some problems in terms of dealing with charity care. We didn't hear today. Charity care ended January 1. We have to deal with a new funding mechanism. I expected the governor to today address the issue of where she wants to go in terms of coming up with a new formula that is non-tax based. I expected her to make some statements other than saying we can't stop corporations from downsizing. I expected her to give something to the middle class worker and employee in New Jersey who now has less job security. We just had several instances of corporate betrayals to our workers.
You mean
And all
what?
I heard about was education. AT&T, 7,000 people gone. PSE&G, 1,500 people gone. Companies laying off our workers, our people, our citizens, left and right. And I didn't hear one word from this governor to give those middle-class workers any security or any hope.
Well, there was a word, I think she gave a line, there's not much we can do about corporate downsizing, and then she went on. You guys in agreement with that? There's not much we can do about corporate downsizing?
She can't have it both ways. We have followed her business agenda, and an agenda on deregulation and giving business incentives since Governor Cohen, Governor Florio, and through Governor Whitman. This legislature and previous legislatures have given their legislative soul to stimulate the economy and provide our governors with business initiatives to stimulate our economic community. However, there is a concomitant responsibility of corporations to go through job retention. If we're going to give them benefits to grow economically, they have to give our workers security that has existed in the corporate structure for many years.
Could the governor argue perhaps that education is a key to getting corporations to come here and grow here? And
Well, I agree with Neil that the events of recent weeks should have been mentioned by the governor more explicitly. And yes, the state can do things to avert massive layoffs in its policies. There's some bills out there now that are going to give the private sector more incentives to relocate here and hire people. But as Neil said, we've been doing that for the better part of the last 10 years. And I think we have to re-examine a lot of those policies. And I think the governor should have been more explicit on that issue.
you think she shortchanged the state by going through the one line where corporate downsizing is going to happen and
we
there's
think
nothing we can do
the
about
most
it?
significant issue in the state is economic growth and job security, and there should have been more mention of that.
Okay. What she did talk about education at length, she specifically asked for help from the legislature to push it through, given some problems that she's had in recent weeks with a Republican-controlled legislature. You think she'll have a problem getting her initiative through the legislature?
We don't know what the initiative is. School funding, I've been working indirectly or directly on school funding since I was a legislative aide more than 20 years ago when Robinson versus Cahill was being dealt with. And we've come a long way and we still have the same type of problem. The governor spoke in platitudes and conclusions. We want to spend less money, we want to give you better facilities, we want to increase our SAT scores, but nowhere in her 12 pages of speeches, she's very poised and she's very bright, I give her that. But nowhere in her speech on this educational conclusory blueprint does she indicate even step one as to how she's going to accomplish dealing with setting up a core curriculum for the state, nor anything that I heard during the course of this speech where she mentions even a hint of what she believes should be the basis for school funding. That was completely absent in this speech. And since this speech only dealt with education, I'm surprised that she didn't mention how she may try to deal with the situation in the future. We're going to have to deal with it as a legislature.
There have been 4 drafts, I believe, of the Commissioner Clagholtz plan that's referred to as the Clagholtz plan. And the governor did not really go into the Clagholtz plan today. And this is her Commissioner of Education. You know, she spoke in broad generalities. And your question as to whether or not she's going to need bipartisan support, it's hard to imagine how the Republicans can carry this all by themselves, because reading between the lines, it looks like this is going to give the suburban districts fewer dollars to go beyond a core curriculum. And the other thing is that in the Clagholtz plan, it refers to what is basically a foundation aid type formula, where the money you do get will be dependent upon criteria such as income and property wealth of the town.
Wouldn't that help Democratic districts, largely urban districts?
It might. It remains to be seen, but it might. But it also could pose a problem for Republican legislators. So
they're not going to come on board because their taxpayers that they represent
they may have to
wouldn't
pick
want
up
them to
the difference, not only within the core curriculum, but certainly for all what they refer to as excess spending. So until, as Neil said, until we see what this means, it's really hard to tell where the political line will be drawn. But you know, John Lynch today, in his remarks on the Senate floor, said that the Democrats will be willing to work provided we're brought in early in the process. And not look to just for votes at the end. So I would urge the governor and her people to get together with the Senate minority and the Assembly minority soon and explain to us where they're going if they expect us to participate.
Okay, up to this point, have you done any on your own in terms of alternative Democratic plan, or are you working on a plan for education in the minority in either house? Well,
I think in the Assembly, Speaker Collins, who has an education background, I've spoken to the Speaker about a week ago, and he's encouraged us that there's going to be bipartisan participation early in the development of the core curriculum for the state, and also having bipartisan input early in terms of school funding, which needs to be addressed by September of '96, the Supreme Court's order. What was disturbingly missing from this speech is that she spoke concerning the needs of our children and what their future is. I did not hear any words which dealt with what we will now provide our children at the early part of their education. I think everyone agrees that the most important part of a child's education is grades K through 6 or 7. That begins the child's foundation for discipline, intellectual growth, emotional growth. There was nothing in this speech at all which gave us any indication that she was going to suggest that more money should be directed to early childhood development in terms of the schools.
Well,
no blueprint at all.
I thought I heard something about preschool, the importance of preschool, and in addition to that, the Education Commissioner telling Michael Aaron prior to the speech, preschool is the sort of thing that they would be keying on, early education.
But after 2 years in office, on this day, we should get more than preschool is important. I recognize it. Senator Kenney recognizes it. All New Jersey residents recognize it. What are you going to do about it to show that importance? Is it going to be increased funding, more money for facilities?
Is this the place to bring that out?
Absolutely.
Think, at least in a broad sense?
You know, the interesting part is that if you look back at her last State of the State, she talked about which marina she was going to sell that she ultimately couldn't, but she gave you specifics, and perhaps that speech was more hyped up because of other important pieces of her political career. But if you compare the first State of the State with today's State of the State, you'll see that this message today is very thin. It's very large in conclusions, very thin in how to put that through.
A couple of broad things she did say. One of the things she said, we have the resources, we just have to make sure they're put to the best use. You agree or disagree?
You know, on the resources, we spend about $11 to $12 billion on education. Of that, about $4.7 billion comes from the state. The percentage of the state share is decreasing since Tom Kaine was in office. The peak was about 1986, where it was 43%. Now it's down to about 38%.
Who's picking up the rest of that?
Property taxpayers.
Okay.
Now, what I'm concerned about is that the governor cited all sorts of things we have to be doing to educate our children. Computers in every classroom. You need air conditioning in these facilities if you're going to go very heavy into computers and electronic technology. We have a high number of immigrant children in the state that have to be educated and brought in. We have a high degree of poverty in our various districts. We have poor facilities. So the pie is being increasingly cut in a way that property taxpayers are going to have to make up the difference. And I'm hoping that this plan is not some sort of technique to reduce the percentage of the pie that the state picks up under our Constitution. If that's the case, then property taxpayers are going to end up having to pay more and more in order to take this state into the 21st century. And that's the real issue here, and that's why, you know, I'm holding back judgment until I see who's going to have to pay for this. Because I hate to be the exception, but education is going to cost the state more, not less, as we go forward. More, not less. And the schools in my county, Hudson County, are bursting at the seams with children. 40, 50 children in a classroom. Half of them come from foreign countries in many of our communities. And they want to teach these children how to use computers and how to be literate. Then they want to use the schools in the morning, at night, in the summertime. They just built a school, I believe, in one of the Oranges. Brand new school, and it's not air conditioned.
It sounds like, I mean, what you're saying there does indeed sound like a tall order that the governor's facing. You'd need to air condition all these schools, and we all know what a lot of these schools are like, and even in the suburbs there's no air conditioning.
And then at the same time we're reducing the income tax, which is the funding mechanism for that $4.7 billion. That's not an insignificant reality here. And I want to know how this is all going to play out.
Okay, and voicemail for homework. I mean, I'd love to have that for my kids. Call and, teach what's the homework, because they won't tell me. I know that.
Right.
But is the governor permitted some kind of a grand vision, as chief executives are, where it's more beautiful than the landscape than it might be in reality? Or is she permitted some kind of grand vision, and is that what she's doing here? Walk with me to the future. This future may never really come to pass, but we got to hope for the best.
She mentioned very little in terms of she's entitled to a grand vision, just as Governor Cahill, Governor Byrne, Governor Kane, Governor Florio, all prior governors had to deal with funding problems, creating a educational mosaic for the future. She's of course entitled to that, but we are entitled to know how she reaches that vision and whether it's going to be an incomplete portrait.
Okay. Does she get any credit on education as to how she's handled it to this point? Example, take her over the Newark schools. Democrats give her any credit on that?
I give her credit for that. I also give her credit for the charter school initiative, which I voted for. I don't believe Neil did, but that had bipartisan support. And I do give her credit for making this the topic today, although I think the speech should have had more on the economy. I think it's important to get it out front. And the question is, should we take her seriously when she invites us to participate in the solution at an early stage?
I want to know what she's going to be doing in terms of the funding. She has taken more than $1 billion out of the revenue stream for school aid. That's essentially what it boils down to. If that money, $1 billion, is not available to our local school districts for good and positive computers, voicemail, any other type of creative and innovative educational tool or modality that's available, but she's taken $1 billion out. How is she going to pay for that if she's already taken the money out? If the state can't provide the dollars as it's required to under our state constitution, the only thing left is for local property taxpayers to pick it up. She's going to have to consider when we go through this funding process whether or not, and I believe we probably should, provide some type of cap on property taxes as part of this entire funding process.
Do you know whether that's coming to pass or not at this point, or
well, we're going to
you'd suggest anyway?
We're going to be looking at what other states have been doing. Michigan, for instance, put on its state referendum how the population want to fund schools. North Carolina, Texas, a number of states have moved forward in terms of different funding plans. Speaker Collins' committee that's going to deal with that relatively soon is going to be looking at a whole myriad of issues. But I would like to have heard something from the governor as a specific, other than she wants a good education for all of our children. We don't disagree with her. We're all in agreement on that issue.
It's interesting that today the Senate President, Donald DeFrancesco, proposed, and it's very important to him, that we allow the public to deduct their property taxes from their income taxes, which would be worth a couple of $100 million in revenue to the state. And so you take that and you put that into the equation, that creates even a bigger problem.
Okay, we've got about 60 seconds left here, a few seconds each perhaps. What's the state of the Democratic Party right now? Care to give a few?
Moving
thoughts?
forward, we have additional members in the Assembly, and hopefully in the next 2 years we'll be in a position where we can come back into the majority and give our vision with specifics for the future.
Okay.
We're very optimistic. We feel we did very well in the last election. We're very competitive now, the Democratic Party in New Jersey, and we're looking forward to these next 2 years.
If you could give a state of the state of Democrats, would it be what? We're on the road back, and what would be your major theme? Would it be economics, as you were talking before?
Keep Newt Gingrich out of New Jersey.
I think we're back.
I didn't know he was coming to New Jersey, huh?
Well, the more he comes into New Jersey, the higher our numbers go up.
Okay.
I think the party's back. Well,
then you like him here, okay.
We believe we're the party of people who work day to day to bring a paycheck in to take care of their needs. And we think we're very competitive and going to be very strong.
Okay, that's all we have time for right now. Senator Kenney, Assemblyman Cohen, thanks for coming by and joining us. And Kent, we're going to send it back to you.
And that concludes NJN's coverage of the governor's State of the State address. Thank you for being with us. I'm Kent Monahan. Good night.